All right, everyone. Today we're going to start talking about the mandibles on the insect mouth. This is the first true um, appendage of the mouth. So, in the blown apart blown apart face mouth diagram that I showed from last time, these are the mandibles. We already talked about the labrum, so let's just do some review. These are the maxillae, and this is the labia. So today we're going to talk about the mandibles, and this is going to be a generalized structure of the mandibles, specifically for winged insects with chewing mouthparts. There are other very bizarre variations of the mandibles in insects. Specifically, like butterflies are usually missing their mandibles, and flies and stink bugs and cicadas and things like that have very thin needle-like mandibles because they're liquid feeders. Today we're going to talk about insects that primarily feed on either plant material, so they kind of have chunkier mandibles, or insects that are carnivorous, so they tend to have very sharp sickle-like mandibles. So let's switch to a drawing here of what the mandibles look like. Speaking of specialized insects, at the end of all of the mouth parts, I'll be doing another video on the specialization of the insect mouth so that we can talk about things like stink bugs and flies and butterflies that have very complicated and bizarre looking mouth parts when you actually look at it up close. So this is a drawing of the insect mandible, just one. So obviously this is repeated on the other side. So the basic structure, they tend to either be triangular shaped or crescent moon shaped for insects that actually bite and chew. The front part of the mandible, sometimes they're called teeth, which I think is stupid. Like these pointy bits up here. In some of the newer texts. In the older texts, they're called the incisors. And is that how you spell incisors? I think that's how you spell it. And then back, so these are larger in predatory species and smaller in plant-feeding species, which makes sense. In predatory species, sometimes the mandible can be nothing but incisors. And in plant-feeding species, they'll be relatively small because in plant-feeding species, this area back here is usually used for chewing, and this is the molar region. Sometimes it's spiky. Frequently, it'll have non-articulating teeth within the molar region, so it gives a three-dimensional surface where it has multiple areas that it can grind plant material together. So like in grasshoppers and in a lot of scarab beetles, which are root-feeding beetles for the most part, or leaf-feeding beetles, this area is extremely well developed, and the incisor area here will be very, very small or rounded off and blunted because they don't particularly need an incisor for anything. Whereas in something like tiger beetle, which feeds exclusively on other insects, the incisors will be very, very sickle-shaped with a very small molar area in the back. And not only that, this incisor area will be kind of channeled out. And the reason for that is digestive fluids from the salivary duct will be pumped through this channel into the body of the insect that they're biting on. And then the liquid material can be sucked back out, kind of like how spiders feed. So these are the two most important areas of the mandible, the incisors and the molar. This is the actual points of feeding. And then the rest of this is how the mandible moves and how it's attached to the body. So these 2 points here and here are sometimes called the articulations. And sometimes they're called condyles, which just depends on who you're reading. These are the points at which the mandible is attached to the insect's head. And they're kind of like a ball joint in your shoulder or in your hip, and they roll back and forth. They can be very, very thickened depending on how powerfully attached the mandibles are to the insect body. Sometimes in grasshoppers, they can be quite large. And then these red bands here, these are the muscles. So I want to make sure I get this right. This, starting on the far right, this is the dorsal, because it's on the back side of it, the dorsal abductor. This tends to be a smaller muscle. It attaches to the outside of the mandible, and when this pulls in, the mandible moves this way. So this is what is used to open the mandibles of insects. You'll see that there's 2-to-1 as far as closing to opening. So on this other side, this is the dorsal, because it's on the back, adductor. And when this pulls in, the mandible closes. And down here is the ventral, because it's on the bottom surface, adductor. So it has 2 adducting muscles to slam the jaw shut. So insects that either hunt for meat or chew plant food will have very, very strong adductor muscles in order to close the jaws to grind the material together. This is specifically for pterygote or winged insects. Pter means wing. In apterygote or wingless insects, these are primitive insects, usually this articulation is missing, and sometimes you have more complicated muscle structures. But the majority of insects are winged, so this is the kind of basic structure of the insect mandible. However, there are variations of this even in plant or animal feeding insects. So the other thing that can happen quite often is that you'll have very large appendages, these are appendages, attached to the insect's mandible. So we talked about the appendages a little bit when we were talking about the insect cuticle. These are invaginations of the cuticle used to strengthen the body wall for muscle attachment. So this is what the red is. And the muscles will actually attach to these appendages here in order to get more leverage on the mandible. So these muscles will frequently attach to like the tentorium, and these appendages are extremely strong. So even when you're trying to remove the muscle, or remove the mandible from an insect's face, these muscles are very strong, the appendages are very strong, and you really have to rip this off the face. So these muscles, by attaching further away from the actual mandible, they can get more leverage on the mandible, so they can snap the jaws closed really, really hard and really, really fast. Again, the adducting muscles attach to a larger appendage because they close much more powerfully, whereas the abducting muscles attach to a smaller appendage because they don't move with as much force. So if you want to look at kind of variations of this, this is the, you can clearly see the mandibles of this tiger beetle or this ground beetle. Let me turn this to yellow so we can draw a little better. So let's get a little thicker so you can really see what's going on here. So these are the mandibles, and as you can see, they're very large. These are predatory insects. They move along the ground very, very quickly, and they charge at and snap up their prey really, really quick, really, really hard. So they have these very, very long sickle-shaped mandibles. These are the mandibles I was talking about that are sometimes hollowed out, so they can inject digestive fluids directly into their prey and then suck it out. On this pronathus head, clearly designed for predation. And this is another predatory jaw, but it's slightly different because these aren't charging at the prey crazily. This is a wasp, and wasps tend to be predatory. But you have a smaller mandible, still kind of sickle-shaped, but it has a lot more incisor teeth. Instead of just being one big tooth, like on the tiger beetle, you have very, very sharp, many sharp teeth. And then if we look at the face of, say, a scarab beetle here, these are plant-feeding beetles. And you can see they have a flatter duller mandible here. So up here, this is the labrum here. This is the labrum that we talked about last time. This is the mandible. They still have an incisor, but the mandible is kind of clunkier, squatter, and these are used for grinding plant food. So if you were to rip this off the face, you'd see a very large molar area that has been developed. Okay, so that is the mandible. It's probably the simplest of the true mouth appendages. Next, we're going to talk about the maxillae, which can be extremely complicated, and then the labium, which can also be extremely complicated. If you remember from last time, I said these are the true mouth appendages. These are controlled by the subesophageal ganglion in the brain, as opposed to the main brain, like the labrum is. So we're going to keep moving down the mouth parts, and I'll see you next time.